The carriage slowed as iron gates groaned open, their black bars wet with rain and age, and the great house beyond emerged like a withheld breath. Lanterns burned low along the drive, casting amber pools that trembled with each step of the horses. She sat very straight inside the carriage, gloved hands folded, eyes fixed upon nothing at all, as if composure itself were a garment she feared to crease. He watched her reflection in the glass, the way she kept her chin lifted while the night pressed close, and he knew that this arrival would wound her more deeply than the road ever could. They had married in haste and in quiet, north of the border, where vows were law without witnesses and mercy could outrun gossip. He had chosen that place for her sake, believing that speed would shelter her from scandal. Yet scandal had followed like weather. Her family's letters still burned in his pocket, thin paper sharp as frost, refusing her name, her portion, her very memory. When the carriage stopped, she reached for the latch first, then paused, breath caught, as though the house itself might recoil. Servants waited in a loose half-circle, their faces schooled into courtesy, their eyes alive with questions. A footman bowed too deeply. A housemaid stared, then looked away. The Duke stepped down and offered his hand. She took it lightly, a bird alighting, and descended into the lamplit gravel. The air smelled of wet earth and iron, of fires banked in patience exhausted. Somewhere a clock struck the hour, solemn and exacting. She murmured her thanks, though no one had yet spoken to her, and followed him beneath the portico. The doors opened, releasing warmth and a hush that was not quite welcome. Inside, the hall rose with ancestral severity, portraits in gilt frames, a staircase worn smooth by centuries of authority, a rug darkened by footsteps that had never paused to doubt their right to be there. She felt herself diminish, felt the old habit of shrinking return, and fought it with a small, stubborn breath. "Your Grace," said the steward, voice respectful, gaze flicking once toward her before retreating. The Duke acknowledged him and gave instructions with measured calm, his tone neither apologetic nor defiant. She listened for her name and did not hear it. The omission stung, though she understood it. Names, here, were promises that demanded proof. When they reached the inner passage, she halted. It was a modest thing, that stopping, yet it rearranged the moment. He turned, surprised. She had removed her gloves and held them together, twisting the leather until it sighed. "I should not cause difficulty," she said, keeping her voice low. "The house is not prepared. I can sleep in the stable." The words fell cleanly, without drama, as if she were offering to fetch water or mend a tear. He stared, hearing in them the echo of doors closed elsewhere, of rooms denied. Behind her, a servant shifted, the sound slight and damning. The Duke's expression did not change, but his stillness gathered weight. He stepped closer, so that the portraits could not hear. "There will be no talk of stables," he said quietly. "You are tired." She shook her head, a careful motion. "I am accustomed to making do." "It would spare you comment." "Spare the house." Her mouth curved with a practiced humility that had once kept peace and now cost her dear. He saw how bravery could resemble surrender when learned too young. He took her gloves from her hands and folded them, an intimacy so small it steadied them both. "Look at me," he said. She did, and the lamplight revealed the shine she refused to shed. His voice lowered, the syllables measured as law. "Tonight you belong here, under my name as my wife." The sentence changed the air. It did not erase the watching eyes, but it claimed a center. He offered his arm again, and this time she rested her hand there, feeling the sure warmth of it through wool. They walked on. Doors opened. A fire was stirred. A tray passed without pause. The house adjusted, grudgingly, to a fact it had not been asked to approve. Later, when she was shown to a room whose windows looked upon yews black with rain, she stood alone and listened to the house breathe. Somewhere below, a voice murmured. Somewhere above, a floor creaked. She touched the coverlet, the carved chair, the mantle cold beneath her fingers. She belonged, he had said. The word felt both sheltering and perilous. He did not enter her room, yet he paused beyond the door, listening as if the walls might speak. He remembered her as she had been when first he noticed her, years earlier, quiet at the edge of a crowded assembly, observing with an intelligence that never sought permission. That memory steadied him now. He knew the house would test her, that kindness here often arrived wearing conditions, and that his title could not bruise rumor into silence. Still, resolve settled in him like a drawn cloak. He would answer questions with steadiness, insults with courtesy, and doubt with time. Below, a servant laughed and was hushed. Above, the rain thinned to a patient whisper. The estate, long unchallenged, sensed a change it did not yet understand, and the night held its breath, waiting to see whether authority would bend toward mercy or demand its price tomorrow. At the threshold, the steward lingered, a question hovering unsaid. She met his eyes and inclined her head, neither servant nor intruder, and he bowed in return. Down the corridor, a maid watched, curious and uncertain. The Duke's steps faded. The clock struck again. She closed the door and pressed her palm to it, steadying herself as the house learned her weight. In the quiet, hope rose, tentative and bright, and with it the knowledge that dawn would bring judgment. Someone somewhere had already begun to whisper. Morning arrived without ceremony, a pale light spreading across the lawns and climbing the stone, as if the house itself were being examined. She woke early, accustomed to vigilance, and lay still while the room revealed its details. Curtains heavy with dustless folds, a hearth clean but cold, a washstand prepared with quiet care. Somewhere below, footsteps passed and paused, the rhythms of a household recalibrating around an unexpected center. She dressed slowly, choosing the simplest gown she owned, soft gray with no ornament, and braided her hair with hands that steadied as the mirror refused to accuse her. When she stepped into the corridor, the air held a cautious politeness. Servants greeted her with careful neutrality, eyes sliding away from her ring as though it might burn. In the breakfast room, the Duke stood by the window, reading a letter whose seal lay broken on the sill. He turned at her approach, his expression easing, and folded the paper without comment. The table had been set for two. The chairs were drawn close enough to suggest intention rather than convenience. She took her seat, surprised by the simple mercy of it. Conversation moved gently, never lingering where it might bruise. He asked after her rest. She thanked him for the fire lit before dawn. Outside, a groom crossed the drive and paused to look up, curiosity open and unguarded. Inside, a maid poured tea with a hand just steady enough. The Duke spoke of weather and roads, of repairs needed before winter deepened. He did not speak of letters. She did not ask. Their silence was not empty. It was held. By midday, the village had discovered her. She sensed it in the change of air when she walked the gardens, in the way voices stilled and resumed too brightly. Two women passed and nodded, their eyes measuring the cut of her sleeves. A child stared openly, tugged away by a mortified mother. The youths watched without judgment. She felt the ground beneath her shoes and kept her pace even, refusing to hurry. Dignity, she had learned, was an act repeated until it became a truth. The Duke met her at the steps as church bells began to practice for Sunday. He offered his arm, and this time she took it without hesitation. Together, they entered the village lane. Faces turned. A man bowed too quickly. Another did not bow at all. At the baker's door, a remark slipped loose, sharpened by familiarity, and he answered it with calm exactitude. "My wife," he said, not loudly, not gently, simply placing the words where they belonged. The remark fell, spent. She felt a warmth spread through her chest. That was not relief alone. In the afternoon, a small parcel appeared on the table beside her book. Inside lay a prayer book, modest, its leather worn to softness. On the flyleaf, her name had been inscribed in a careful hand. No title yet, only the certainty of being addressed. She closed it and held it briefly against her, the gesture unnoticed and necessary. The Duke watched from the doorway, then turned away, giving her the privacy of gratitude. As days unfolded, tokens arrived without fanfare. A shawl placed over her chair before the draft found her. A place card bearing her initials at dinner slipped in as though it had always been there. Instructions given to the house that required no enforcement because they were spoken once and meant. Gossip grew, as gossip does, fattened by absence of spectacle. Letters arrived thick with concern and edged with doubt. Invitations came, cautiously worded, as if civility itself were on trial. One evening, she found him in the library, the lamps turned low. He stood before a shelf, not selecting a book, simply considering the order of things. She hesitated, then entered. The room smelled of polish and paper, of seasons held in ink. He turned, surprised, and for a moment they stood with nothing between them but air. "I do not wish to be a burden," she said, the old phrase returning like a reflex. "I know what it costs you to be plain." He regarded her, and the restraint he wore for the world loosened by a fraction. "It costs me more to be silent," he replied. He told her then, without flourish, how long he had noticed her, how admiration had grown where convenience had been expected, how the border vows had felt less like haste than relief. His voice did not rise. It did not plead. It laid the truth down and waited. She listened, the room narrowing to the space they shared. When she spoke, it was to confess fear rather than doubt. Fear of failing him. Fear of being found wanting by a house that spoke in glances. He took her hands, not to reassure, but to anchor. "We will let time answer them," he said. The promise was not grand. It was sufficient. The following morning brought a letter edged in cream, its script formal and deliberate, an invitation to a winter assembly at a neighboring estate, extended to them both. She held it and felt the familiar tightening. He read it once and nodded. "We will go," he said. "Together." The words settled between them, steadying and bright. That night, as the house prepared, she stood at her window and watched the drive fill with shadow. Somewhere below, a servant whispered and was answered. The prayer book lay open on her table, her name quiet and undeniable. Beyond the glass, lanterns flickered into life, and with them the knowledge that the world would soon look at her directly. She did not turn away. The morning of the assembly dawned with a brittle clarity, sunlight striking the frost-dusted lawns and tracing every edge of the estate in sharp relief. She dressed slowly, selecting a gown of pale cream embroidered with threads of silver that caught the light without demanding it. Her hair was arranged simply, braided and pinned with restraint, a quiet assertion of her dignity. She moved through the room with deliberate calm, each gesture measured, each breath an act of ownership over herself. Outside, the wind whispered across the yews, and the chimneys exhaled smoke, signaling the world beyond the house to take note of the day's proceedings. He waited at the foot of the grand staircase, posture impeccable, a coat of dark navy tailored to the breadth of his shoulders, waistcoat precisely aligned. When he saw her descend, he offered the smallest inclination of the head, an acknowledgment that spoke of both pride and protection. Her hand found his, not out of necessity, but for the assurance it conveyed. They walked together toward the carriage, the gravel crunching under their feet, a rhythm that seemed to announce their unity to any who dared look. The village lane was already stirring. Faces turned, curiosity plain, some respectful, others leavened with thinly concealed derision. A child stepped forward, only to be tugged back by a mother whose gloved hand trembled slightly. He guided her with gentle firmness, ensuring her presence commanded no more than what she had earned, poise and recognition. At the gates, the carriage waited, horses steaming in the cold air, harnesses gleaming as if polished for ceremony. The Duke opened the door for her, a silent gesture of precedence, and she stepped in, the hem of her gown brushing the wood, her eyes forward, unflinching. Inside the carriage, they were enclosed in warmth and the muted scent of leather and polished wood. He turned toward her, studying her in a light that softened even the sharpest angles of her fear. "You will not falter," he said quietly, each syllable deliberate, weighted with faith rather than command. Her lips pressed together, not in reply, but in contemplation. She understood the truth of his words. To falter would not be to fail him alone, but to betray the fragile confidence he had woven around her. When they arrived at the neighboring estate, the air was thick with expectation. Carriages lined the drive, their occupants draped in silks and velvets, jewels glittering like morning frost. Servants and footmen bowed as the Duke passed, whispers curling through the spaces between polished shoes and gloved hands. She followed his lead, her posture erect, her gaze steady. He did not rush her, Nor did he shield her entirely. He walked with her as both partner and protector, allowing society to see what he claimed without question. She belonged by his side. Inside the grand hall, the assembly paused in a collective inhale. Crystal chandeliers hung above, each prism catching light and throwing it across tapestries and painted ceilings. She felt their eyes, measuring, evaluating, yet she did not shrink. A bow of acknowledgement, subtle and precise, met their scrutiny. The Duke inclined his head toward her, and she understood in that single gesture that he would answer any slight without embarrassment, with calm authority. She felt the weight of expectation lift slightly, replaced by a quiet, steady confidence. Throughout the evening, tokens of his regard manifested in small, deliberate acts. A cup placed within her reach at the table, a conversation steered to include her voice, a hand offered silently in passage through the hall. Each gesture, though minor, spoke of constancy and foresight, and with each one, the whisper softened, suspicion giving way to respect. She began to feel the shift, subtle yet unmistakable, as the house and the assembly acknowledged the truth they could not ignore. He spoke to her at moments, low words carried only between them. "Do you see?" he murmured once, as she navigated a conversation with an elder lady. The words meant to remind her that she was not alone. His hands brushed hers, brief contact, a tether. "You are as you must be," he added, and she felt the full measure of his intent, protection entwined with admiration, authority balanced by tenderness. In his presence, she learned to navigate scrutiny with grace, discovering strength she had thought lost to the past. Later, a minor slip occurred, a remark, sharp-edged, aimed to unsettle. Her first instinct was to apologize, to diminish herself, but she remembered the morning's counsel. She lifted her head, met the eyes of her interlocutor, and responded with calm dignity, her voice even measured. The effect was immediate. The man blinked, unprepared for such quiet fortitude. The Duke observed, satisfied, though his satisfaction was tempered by the vigilance he maintained for every hidden challenge. They moved together, unshaken, their unity evident without need of proclamation. As the evening drew toward its close, they stepped into a small adjoining garden. Snow had begun to fall lightly, soft as whispered secrets, catching on hedges and the edges of lantern light. He took her hand again, guiding her along the frost-laced path, and the world narrowed to the crunch of snow underfoot and the faint heat between them. "You see," he said softly, "they can doubt, they can question, but what is ours is beyond their reach." She leaned slightly into his side, allowing the truth of that statement to settle. For the first time, she felt entirely claimed, not as possession, but as partner, as equal in quiet authority. At the edge of the garden, he paused, allowing her to turn and observe the path behind them. The lanterns glowed faintly, casting long shadows that stretched toward the estate. She understood, in that moment, the magnitude of the journey they had undertaken, from whispered dismissal to acknowledged presence. She had been prepared to sleep in a stable, and yet here she stood, fully seen, fully claimed, and yet not the mistress of fortune alone, but of her own courage. A servant lingered at the doorway, unseen yet attentive, and she caught the figure's watchful eyes. Somewhere, a carriage waited to return them to the house. Snowflakes settled on her sleeve, ephemeral and brilliant, mirroring the fragile shift in society's gaze. He tightened his hold just slightly, an imperceptible affirmation, and she smiled softly, a mixture of relief and newfound strength. Yet beneath the satisfaction, a whisper of uncertainty remained. The house had observed, the assembly had witnessed, but tomorrow and every day after would demand constancy. She turned her gaze upward, where lanterns twinkled like distant stars among the bare branches, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of belonging, not as a concession to him or to the house, but as a recognition of her own worth intertwined with his steadfastness. Yet the soft wind carried a note of caution. Whispers were never silenced completely, and the road ahead, though brightened, remained a challenge. She exhaled slowly, letting the snow melt her tension for a heartbeat, while knowing the morning would demand the same poise, the same quiet courage. As they retraced their steps toward the house, The lantern light caught his eyes in a way that held both warmth and resolve. "Together," he murmured, a single word that encompassed promise, protection, and choice. She met his gaze and nodded, understanding the depth contained in such brevity. Behind them, the garden held the first trace of their triumph, delicate and unclaimed, as if the world were testing whether this newfound place in society could endure. She stepped onto the gravel path, hand in his, heart lifted yet aware of the vigilance still required, and the night seemed to hold its breath for what was to come.